The aroma of roasted meat and freshly baked bread filled the dining room, masking the tension that had been simmering all day. The family had gathered for what was supposed to be a celebratory dinner, but I already knew how this evening would end, with me humiliated, just like every other time. I carried the steaming platter to the table, careful not to spill anything. My mother-in-law, Brenda, sat at the head of the table, her eyes scanning me with barely concealed disdain. She was the kind of woman who could turn a compliment into an insult, her words wrapped in sugar but laced with venom. She ruled the family with an iron fist, and everyone, including my husband, Daniel, seemed to worship her. "Finally!" Brenda exclaimed as I placed the dish in front of her. I thought we'd starve before Lisa finished cooking. Her laughter was a cue for the others to join in, and they did, even Daniel. My face burned, but I forced a smile. There was no use arguing. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. The meal began, and every bite brought a new critique. "This roast is dry," Brenda declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Did you use a recipe, Lisa, or just wing it as usual?" Laughter rippled around the table. I clenched my hands under the tablecloth, my nails digging into my palms. Daniel, sitting beside me, leaned over and whispered, "Just let it go. Babe, you know how she is." His tone was casual, as if this kind of treatment was perfectly normal. It wasn't, but he didn't see it, or maybe he didn't care. When the meal ended, Brenda turned to me with a saccharine smile. "Lisa, dear, since you cooked, it's only fair you clean up, too. We wouldn't want anyone else dealing with this mess. Now would we?" The room fell silent, everyone waiting for my response. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. As I gathered the plates, Brenda added, "And make sure to scrub the pots properly this time. Last time there were still stains." Her voice was sharp enough to cut through steel. I worked in the kitchen, my back to the laughter and chatter in the dining room. The clinking of plates in the sink drowned out their voices, but it couldn't drown out the shame and frustration bubbling inside me. This wasn't what I'd imagined when I married Daniel. I'd thought I was joining a family, but instead, I'd become their punching bag. When I finally emerged from the kitchen, the table was empty. Everyone had moved to the living room, where they were sipping coffee and sharing stories. Brenda was perched on the couch like a queen, her voice dominating the room. Daniel was at her side, laughing at her jokes, as if he hadn't seen the way she treated me. I stood in the doorway, unsure of whether to join them or retreat upstairs. Before I could decide, Brenda spotted me. "Oh, there you are, Lisa. We were just talking about you." Her tone was cheerful, but I knew better than to trust it. "Oh," I said, forcing a polite smile. "What about?" "We were discussing how lucky Daniel is to have married someone so capable." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. The others chuckled, and I felt the heat rise to my cheeks. "You've really settled into your role, haven't you? Cooking, cleaning. It's like you were made for it." The room erupted in laughter, and I felt my chest tighten. I glanced at Daniel, hoping for some support, but he was too busy laughing along with the rest of them. My heart sank. It wasn't just Brenda who didn't respect me. It was the entire family. And Daniel, the man who had promised to love and protect me, was no different. The laughter echoed in my ears as I walked away from the living room, my steps feeling heavier with each passing second. I reached the stairs and hesitated, glancing back. Daniel caught my eye for a brief moment, but instead of concern or understanding, his expression was blank. He didn't even try to follow me. Upstairs, I closed the bedroom door and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. My chest felt tight, a mixture of anger and sadness swelling within me. This wasn't the first time Brenda had humiliated me in front of the family, but tonight felt worse. Maybe it was the way Daniel had laughed at her jokes, or the way he'd shrugged off my discomfort like it was nothing. Either way, I felt utterly alone. I sank onto the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. They were red and pruned from scrubbing the dishes, a stark contrast to the manicured, delicate hands of the other women in the family. Brenda's words echoed in my mind. "You've really settled into your role." Was that how they all saw me? A maid, A servant, someone to be used and discarded? A sudden knock on the door jolted me from my thoughts. It opened before I could respond, and Daniel stepped in, his expression unreadable. "What's wrong?" he asked, as if he hadn't been present for the entire ordeal. I stared at him, disbelief mingling with anger. "What's wrong?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "You sat there and laughed while your mother humiliated me in front of everyone." Again, Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're overreacting, Lisa. Mom's just like that. She doesn't mean anything by it." "Doesn't mean anything by it?" I stood, my voice rising. "She treats me like dirt, and you just let her. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" Daniel's face hardened. "Look, you need to toughen up. This is how my family is. They joke around, they tease. It's nothing personal." "It feels personal," I shot back. "Every comment, every jab, it's always aimed at me. And you never defend me. Not once." He shrugged, his indifference cutting deeper than any insult Brenda had thrown at me. "What do you want me to do, Lisa? Start a fight with my mother? She's the head of this family. You need to learn how to deal with her." I felt my heart break a little more at his words. "And what about me?" I whispered. "Aren't I part of your family? Don't I deserve your support?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he turned and left the room, leaving me standing there, my fists clenched and tears streaming down my face. The next morning, I woke early and busied myself with household chores. It was my way of coping, a distraction from the anger and helplessness I felt. Brenda, of course, wasted no time assigning me tasks. By the time I finished cleaning the living room, my hands ached, and my back was sore. As I gathered the laundry, my phone buzzed on the counter. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked it up, surprised to see a message from my cousin, Sarah. "Hey, Lisa. I'm in town for a few days. Let's catch up." For the first time in days, I felt a spark of happiness. Sarah and I had grown up together, and she was one of the few people who truly understood me. She was also fiercely protective, never one to let anyone walk all over her, or those she cared about. I quickly replied, "I'd love to see you. How about lunch tomorrow?" Sarah's response came almost immediately. "Perfect. Can't wait to see you." The thought of seeing her lifted my spirits. Maybe she could help me find some clarity, or at least provide a shoulder to lean on. The next day, I met Sarah at a cozy cafe in town. She looked as radiant as ever, her confidence evident in the way she carried herself. As soon as she saw me, she enveloped me in a warm hug. "Lisa, you look tired," she said, her brow furrowing. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to share. But the moment I opened my mouth, the floodgates burst. I told her everything, Brenda's constant criticism, Daniel's indifference, the way I felt like an outsider in my own home. By the time I finished, my voice was shaking, and tears threatened to spill. Sarah listened intently, her expression growing darker with each word. When I finally stopped, she leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "Lisa, this is unacceptable. You deserve so much better than this." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I feel trapped." "You're not trapped," Sarah said firmly. "You just need to remember who you are. You're stronger than this, Lisa, and you don't have to face it alone." Her words ignited something in me. A flicker of hope, a reminder that I wasn't as powerless as I felt. When I returned home, I felt different, stronger. Sarah's support had reminded me that I wasn't alone, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could stand up for myself. But Brenda was quick to put me back in my place. As soon as I walked through the door, she barked, "Lisa, the laundry isn't going to fold itself. And while you're at it, mop the kitchen floor. It's filthy." I glanced at Daniel, who was lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He didn't even look up. Normally, I would have swallowed my pride and done as I was told. But today, something inside me snapped. I straightened my back, met Brenda's gaze, and said, "I'll do it after dinner." Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she was speechless. But then her expression hardened. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with menace. "You heard me," I said calmly. "I've been running around all day, and I need a break." The room fell silent. Even Daniel looked up, his eyes darting between me and Brenda. I braced myself for the backlash, but I didn't care. For the first time, I was standing up for myself, and it felt good. Brenda's silence didn't last long. Her face twisted in disbelief, then fury. "A break," she hissed, her tone laced with venom. "Since when do you think you're entitled to a break? Lisa? This family doesn't need freeloaders who can't pull their weight." I felt my stomach churn, but I held my ground. "I've done more than my share today. I'm exhausted, Brenda. Surely you can understand that." Daniel's voice cut through the tension, startling me. "Lisa," he said sharply, "just do what Mom's asking. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal." The words echoed in my mind, each syllable stabbing deeper. I turned to him, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. "It's always not a big deal, isn't it, Daniel? Every insult, every order, every time I'm treated like a servant in this house. It's never a big deal to you." His face hardened, but he didn't respond. Brenda, sensing an opportunity, smirked. "That's because Daniel understands respect," she said. "Something you clearly lack." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. My voice was quiet but firm. "Respect is earned, Brenda. And you've done nothing to earn mine." Her gasp was audible, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then she stormed out, her heels clicking furiously against the floor. Daniel followed her, leaving me standing alone in the silence. My heart was racing, and though I felt a small surge of pride for standing up for myself, it was drowned out by the weight of what had just happened. The days that followed were tense. Brenda barely spoke to me, and when she did, her words were clipped and cold. Daniel, too, was distant, his frustration evident in the way he avoided eye contact and kept his responses short. I felt like an intruder in my own home, every step a reminder of the fragile peace I'd shattered. But I didn't regret what I'd said. If anything, it made me more determined. For too long, I'd let Brenda walk all over me. I'd let Daniel's indifference chip away at my self-worth. No more. I was done being the family doormat. Sarah called one evening, her voice a balm to my frayed nerves. "How are things?" she asked, her concern palpable. "Difficult," I admitted, "but I'm standing my ground. I'm not letting them push me around anymore." "That's my girl," she said, her pride evident. "Keep it up, Lisa. You deserve so much better than this." Her words bolstered me, reminding me that I wasn't alone. I began to focus on myself, finding small ways to reclaim my sense of self-worth. I started journaling, pouring my thoughts and feelings onto the page. I went for long walks, letting the fresh air clear my mind. And I reminded myself every day that I was stronger than they thought. A week later, Sarah came to visit. She arrived unannounced, her presence a surprise that left Brenda visibly annoyed. "Who's this?" Brenda asked, her tone icy. "This is my cousin, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "She's here to visit me." Brenda's lips thinned, but she said nothing. Sarah, however, wasn't one to be intimidated. She smiled sweetly and extended a hand. "Nice to meet you, Brenda. Lisa's told me so much about you." The tension in the room was palpable as Brenda shook Sarah's hand, her expression unreadable. Sarah's gaze didn't waver, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in Brenda's eyes. Over the next few hours, Sarah's presence was a breath of fresh air. She chatted with ease, her confidence and warmth filling the room. But she didn't miss a single detail. She saw the way Brenda's comments were laced with insults, the way Daniel ignored me, the way the family dynamic was skewed. When Brenda left the room, Sarah turned to me, her voice low. "This isn't just disrespect, Lisa. This is abuse. You need to start thinking about what's best for you." Her words hit me hard. I'd known for a long time that things weren't right, but hearing it from someone else made it feel more real. I nodded, unable to speak, and Sarah squeezed my hand. "I'm here for you," she said. "Whatever you need." The following night, Brenda hosted another family dinner. As usual, I was expected to cook and serve, while everyone else relaxed. But this time, Sarah was there, watching everything with sharp eyes. When dinner was served, Brenda immediately began her critique. "The chicken is dry," she said, her tone dismissive, "and the vegetables are overcooked. Honestly, Lisa, is it so hard to follow a simple recipe?" Sarah's fork clattered onto her plate, drawing everyone's attention. "Excuse me," she said, her voice icy, "but is this how you always treat Lisa?" The room fell silent, everyone staring at her in shock. Brenda's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Sarah didn't wait for a response. She turned to Daniel. "And you," she said, her tone sharp. "You're her husband. Why do you let your mother talk to her like this?" Daniel's face flushed. "It's not a big deal," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. "Not a big deal?" Sarah repeated, her voice rising. "Your wife is treated like a servant in her own home, and you think it's not a big deal? Grow up, Daniel. Be a man and stand up for her." The tension in the room was suffocating, but I felt a surge of gratitude and pride. Sarah had done what I'd been too afraid to do for so long. Stand up to Brenda and Daniel. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. The silence that followed Sarah's bold statement was almost unbearable. Brenda, usually so quick with a snide comment, was rendered speechless. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line, but she said nothing. Daniel, on the other hand, looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "I think it's time for some honesty," Sarah continued, her voice steady but firm. "Lisa has been putting up with this nonsense for far too long. You treat her like she's beneath you, like she's not part of this family. And Daniel, you're just as guilty for letting it happen." I glanced around the table, my heart pounding. No one dared to speak. Brenda's other children exchanged nervous glances, while Daniel fidgeted uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted, and Brenda didn't seem to know how to handle it. When Sarah finally leaned back in her chair, her gaze unwavering, Brenda cleared her throat. "I don't know who you think you are," she said, her voice trembling with controlled rage, "but you have no right to come into my home and speak to me this way." Sarah smirked, her confidence unshaken. "I have every right when it comes to defending Lisa. If you can't see how wrong your behavior is, maybe it's time someone called you out on it." Brenda's face turned red, and I could see the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. But Sarah didn't stop there. She turned to Daniel, her expression softening slightly. "And you, Daniel, you need to ask yourself what kind of husband you want to be. Because right now, you're failing." After dinner, Daniel pulled me aside, his expression a mix of frustration and embarrassment. "What was that all about?" he demanded, his voice low but tense. "Why did you let Sarah talk to my mom like that?" I stared at him, incredulous. "Let her? Daniel, she stood up for me because you never do. She said what I've been too afraid to say for years." He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. "You don't understand. My mom is—" "Your mom is a bully," I interrupted, my voice shaking. "And you enable her. Do you know how humiliating it is to be treated like this every single day? And to have the one person who's supposed to support me just stand by and let it happen?" Daniel looked away, his jaw tightening. "It's not that simple, Lisa." "It is that simple," I said, my voice breaking. "You either stand up for me, or you're no better than she is." For a moment, I thought he might apologize, might finally take responsibility. But instead, he said, "I think you're overreacting." The words hit me like a slap. I turned away, tears stinging my eyes. "Maybe Sarah's right," I said quietly. "Maybe I deserve better than this." The next morning, I confided in Sarah. She listened intently, her brow furrowed in thought. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp with determination. "We need to turn the tables," she said. "Show them that you're not someone they can push around." I hesitated, unsure of what she meant. "How?" Sarah's smile was sly. "Leave that to me. But first, I need to make a few calls." Over the next few days, Sarah worked tirelessly, her phone constantly buzzing with activity. She wouldn't tell me exactly what she was planning, only that it would be worth it. In the meantime, I focused on maintaining my composure, refusing to let Brenda's taunts get to me. The weekend arrived, and with it, another family gathering. This time, however, Sarah had a surprise in store. She arrived with a man in a tailored suit and a briefcase, his demeanor exuding professionalism and authority. "This is Mr. Caldwell," Sarah announced, her tone confident. "He's a family attorney. We've been discussing some matters that pertain to Lisa." Brenda's face paled, her bravado faltering for the first time. "What kind of matters?" she demanded. Sarah's smile was razor-sharp. "Let's just say that Lisa has been documenting everything. The insults, the mistreatment, the way you've been exploiting her as free labor. It's all here." She gestured to the briefcase, which Mr. Caldwell opened to reveal a thick stack of papers. Brenda's other children exchanged worried glances, while Daniel looked like he was about to faint. "This is ridiculous," Brenda sputtered. "You can't." "Oh, but we can," Sarah interrupted, her tone icy. "And if you don't want this to become a legal matter, I suggest you start treating Lisa with the respect she deserves." From that moment on, everything changed. Brenda's sharp comments were replaced with forced politeness, her demeanor suddenly cautious. Daniel, too, seemed to have a wake-up call. He began making more of an effort, though it was clear he was still grappling with the fallout. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. But it wasn't enough. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. "You deserve better." And I was determined to make sure I got it. Brenda's sudden politeness was more unsettling than her insults had ever been. She greeted me with a stiff smile in the mornings, kept her critiques to herself during meals, and avoided any direct confrontation. But I knew it wasn't genuine. She was terrified of the potential consequences Sarah had dangled in front of her. Daniel, on the other hand, was still walking on eggshells. He'd begun asking me how I was feeling, offering to help around the house. Little gestures that seemed more like damage control than genuine care. I appreciated the change, but it was too little, too late. Sarah encouraged me to take advantage of the newfound peace to focus on myself. "You've spent so much time bending over backward for these people," she said. "Now it's time to figure out what you want." Her words struck a chord. I realized I didn't even know what made me happy anymore. My life had revolved around keeping Brenda happy and avoiding Daniel's indifference. Now, for the first time, I had the space to think about my own needs. With Sarah's encouragement, I began exploring my passions. I enrolled in an online course on interior design, something I'd always been interested in but never had the time or courage to pursue. It felt exhilarating to do something for myself, something that had nothing to do with Brenda or Daniel. Brenda noticed the change immediately. "What's all this?" she asked one afternoon, gesturing to the laptop and notebooks spread across the dining table. "I'm taking a course," I replied simply. Her eyes narrowed. "And who's going to handle the housework while you're off playing student?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "I've already taken care of everything that needs to be done today. And even if I hadn't, that's not your concern." Her mouth opened, then closed. She seemed at a loss for words, and the victory was sweeter than I'd imagined. The more I focused on myself, the more tension grew between Daniel and me. He wasn't used to me standing up for myself, and it showed. One night, he finally snapped. "Lisa, what's going on with you?" he demanded as we sat in the living room. "You've been acting different." "Different how?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "You're not as accommodating as you used to be. You're always busy with your courses, and you don't even ask me how my day was anymore." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you even realize how ridiculous that sounds? You're upset because I'm not bending over backward for you?" "That's not what I meant," he said, his tone defensive. "I just feel like you're pulling away from me." I sighed, my frustration boiling over. "Daniel, I've been pulling away because I've realized something. You don't respect me. You've never stood up for me, and you've let your family treat me like a servant. I'm done living like that." His face hardened. "So what? You're just going to leave?" "I haven't decided yet," I said honestly. "But if you want to save this marriage, you need to show me that you're willing to change. Words aren't enough anymore, Daniel. I need action." Just as I was beginning to feel stronger, Sarah dropped a bombshell. "Lisa, She said one evening as we sat on my porch, sipping tea, "I need to tell you something. I didn't just hire that attorney to scare Brenda. I've been talking to him about helping you take control of your finances and your life." "What do you mean?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "You need an exit strategy," she said bluntly. "Whether or not you stay with Daniel, you deserve to have options. I've been looking into ways to help you become financially independent. That interior design course? It's just the beginning." Her words filled me with a mixture of gratitude and fear. The thought of leaving Daniel and starting over was terrifying, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I felt like I had choices. The turning point came during yet another family dinner. Brenda, despite her attempts to appear civil, couldn't resist one final jab. "So, Lisa," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "how's your little hobby going? Have you figured out how to make money playing decorator yet?" Before I could respond, Sarah interjected. "Actually, Lisa's doing incredibly well. In fact, she's been networking with some top designers in the city. Who knows? She might end up redecorating this house someday. If she decides to stick around." The color drained from Brenda's face, and I couldn't help but smile. Sarah's confidence was infectious, and for the first time I felt like I was in control. That night, I made a decision. I sat Daniel down and told him everything. "I'm not happy," I said, my voice steady. "And I don't think you are either. We need to figure out what we want. Together or apart." He looked at me, stunned. "Lisa, I don't want to lose you." "Then prove it," I said. "Because I'm done waiting for you to change." The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I moved in with Sarah temporarily, giving myself the space I needed to think. Brenda was furious, Daniel was heartbroken, and for the first time I felt free. Moving in with Sarah was like stepping into a new world. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Her apartment was a cozy, modern space filled with light and warmth. Everything that Brenda's house wasn't. But more than the surroundings, it was the sense of freedom that lifted a weight off my shoulders. Sarah was my greatest cheerleader. "You've taken the first step, Lisa," she said one morning as we sipped coffee on her balcony. "Now it's time to figure out what's next." Her words resonated with me. What was next? For years, my life had revolved around trying to please people who didn't value me. Now, I had the chance to rediscover myself, and I wasn't going to waste it. I threw myself into my interior design course, spending hours researching, sketching, and networking. With Sarah's connections, I managed to secure a small project, redesigning a boutique cafe in the city. It was a modest start, but it felt monumental to me. For the first time, I was doing something that made me feel alive. Daniel showed up at Sarah's apartment a week after I moved in. He looked disheveled and exhausted, a stark contrast to the confident man I'd once known. "Lisa, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. I hesitated, but Sarah nudged me gently. "Hear him out," she whispered. We sat on the balcony, the city buzzing below us. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his expression filled with regret. "I messed up," he admitted. "I should have stood up for you. I should have been a better husband." His words tugged at my heart, but I couldn't let myself be swayed so easily. "It's not just about standing up for me, Daniel," I said. "It's about respect. About seeing me as your equal. Not someone who's just there to serve your family." "I know," he said quickly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I want to make things right. I want to go to therapy together. I want to work on us." His sincerity caught me off guard, but I wasn't ready to make a decision. "I need time," I said. "I'm not saying no, but I'm not ready to say yes either." He nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I understand. Take all the time you need." News of my departure had spread through Daniel's family like wildfire, and Brenda was not handling it well. She called me one evening, her voice icy. "Lisa, this little stunt of yours has gone on long enough. It's time to come back and fulfill your responsibilities." I laughed, the sound surprising even me. "Responsibilities? You mean being your unpaid maid and punching bag?" "No, thank you, Brenda." Her sharp intake of breath was almost satisfying. "Don't you dare speak to me like that. "I'm done being afraid of you," I said firmly. "You don't control me anymore, Brenda. And if you ever try to interfere in my life again, you'll regret it." The line went dead, and I felt a surge of pride. I had finally stood up to her, and it felt incredible. With every passing day, I felt more like myself. The cafe redesign was a success, and word of my work began to spread. I started getting inquiries from other small businesses, and before long I was juggling multiple projects. It was challenging, but it was also exhilarating. Sarah was my biggest supporter, always cheering me on and reminding me how far I'd come. "You're a badass," she said one evening as we celebrated my latest project. "Don't ever let anyone dim your light again." Her words stayed with me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly living, not just surviving. Months passed, and I continued to thrive. Daniel, true to his word, began attending therapy on his own. He sent me updates occasionally, but he never pressured me to return. It was clear he was working on himself, and I respected him for that. One evening, he asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, curious to see how much he had changed. He looked different, calmer, more grounded. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "About us, about my family, about everything. And I realized I never really appreciated you for who you are. I took you for granted, and I'm sorry." His words were genuine, but I still wasn't sure if I could trust him. "What do you want from me, Daniel?" I asked. "I want to support you," he said. "Whether we're together or not, I want you to know that I'm in your corner." It was the answer I hadn't expected, and it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Despite Daniel's progress, there was still unfinished business with Brenda. One day I decided to visit her. When she opened the door, her expression was a mix of shock and disdain. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I came to set the record straight," I said, stepping inside. "You don't control me anymore, Brenda. I've built a life for myself, and I won't let you or anyone else tear it down." She scoffed, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "You think you're better than us now?" "No," I said calmly. "I just know my worth, and I won't let anyone treat me like I'm less than I am." For the first time, Brenda had nothing to say. I left her house feeling lighter than I had in years. With Brenda out of my life and Daniel working on himself, I felt a sense of closure. I wasn't sure if we'd ever reconcile, but I knew that I was finally in control of my own happiness. I continued to grow my interior design business, eventually opening my own studio. Sarah became my business partner, and together we built something truly remarkable. Looking back, I realized that everything I had endured had led me to this moment. I was stronger, wiser, and more confident than I'd ever been. Brenda's taunts, Daniel's indifference. They were nothing more than memories now, reminders of how far I'd come. As I stood in my studio, surrounded by the life I'd created, I felt a deep sense of pride. I had reclaimed my life, and no one could ever take that away from me.